Hello and welcome back. If you're back at this video, it means that you're done with the exercise of identifying use cases. Now let's see how we did. When I do this session in a classroom and I give participants the same exercise, these are some of the identified use cases names that I actually get. I don't know the list that you have written down on your piece of paper, but if they are anything close to what I have actually written on this particular slide, then I'm afraid our use case identification may not be the right ones. A couple of the ones that are mentioned here are pretty close, but they are actually not correct in terms of use case identification. So that being said, how are we supposed to go about knowing what exactly constitute a use case, or how do we go about identification of use cases the right way? Now let's see and learn the 4 tests that are provided by Craig Larman, which is going to help us with respect to use case identification themselves. Craig Larman, in his book Applying UML and Patterns, suggests the size test, the boss test, and the EVP test as a way of identifying use cases correctly. And I've added the first one, the naming test, to it. Now let's look at each one of them in a little bit of detail to understand how they actually help us in identification of use cases. By the way, if you actually have a use case that actually passes all these 4 tests, that means you're on the right path with respect to identifying a use case. So let's start with the naming test. If you remember what a use case definition consisted of, it was made up of a series of steps with respect to a particular actor producing a measurable business results. Now, in terms of English grammar or parts of speech, what is the part of speech that helps you with the action of steps? That is nothing but a verb. But just a verb doesn't give you the entire context, and hence we typically tend to add a noun to go with that particular verb. Hence, a good use case name is something that ideally has a verb and a noun to go with it, and it ideally should not be an extremely lengthy sentence, but probably something that's made up of not more than 3 or 4 words. So that's what we may mean by a naming test. A use case name consisting of a noun and a verb that defines the action that's happening against that noun. That's what we mean by the naming test. Now let's take a look at the other 3 tests. In this particular context, the size and granularity test mean the same. They're actually synonyms, and in this context, they can actually be used interchangeably. And the other 2 tests, the BOSS and the EVP test, the way I look at them as the 2 ends of a particular measure or a scale. Now the size test is a way of saying what is a good size of the use cases that we want to actually identify for the system that is being modeled. And on the minimum side of that particular scale, we say it's something, we call it as a BOSS test. Whereas on the maximum side, we call it as the EVP test, or the elementary business process test. Please note, this is not a mathematical scale by any means. So we really can't say a good use case should be weighing 25 kgs or 25 centimeters. No, we do not have a way of saying that. But a good use case should ideally be something that is larger than a BOSS test, but something that's smaller than a EVP. Or another simple way of saying is a good use case size is something that passes both the BOSS test and the EVP test. Now let's look at in detail about what a BOSS and the EVP tests are. Let's start with the BOSS test, and let's understand that with the help of an example. Assume both of us are working for the same retail store, and you're my boss. And for this particular day, you have asked me to manage the returns desk. Now, just to make sure we are on the same page, returns desk is basically the desk where a customer who has purchased something earlier can come back to this particular desk to either exchange or return whatever they've actually purchased. And the person who manages this particular desk helps this particular customer with whatever returns or returning back the items that they have purchased with for this particular customer. You being the boss, you have assigned this particular desk for me, and assume that a few hours have passed in that particular day, and you are just passing by and you asked me a very simple question. And the question that you asked me was, GT, what have you done since this morning? And to that, I could have actually answered your question in 2 different ways. and you decide which of these options you would have actually liked for the answer to be in, and hence which of the options that you really liked as the answer that I gave you to this particular question. So as my first answer, I replied to your question by saying, boss, I've done 5 logins since this morning. And the reason I answered that particular question were 5 customers had actually come in, and I in fact had helped 5 different customers with whatever needs that they had in terms of the returns that they wanted me to handle. Now, would you like this answer? Or what if, having done the exact same work, I answered the question in a different way? I would have actually said, I have actually handled 5 returns. Now, which of these 2 options do you really like? And the real question is, why is that we probably are going to choose the second option, which is, I wish I had the answer that I had given you was handle returns instead of actually saying login. Now, that's a real question to think about, and that's the one that really answers us as to what the boss test really means. So I guess most of us would have chosen the second option. So we probably would have wanted to hear the answer of I've handled 5 returns rather than saying I've handled 5 logins. And the reason for that is 2 things with respect to the answer I've done 5 logins. First and foremost, it fails to convey to the boss as to what has actually been achieved from a business perspective. That's the main reason. Just saying 5 login doesn't convey, but whereas handle returns actually has the added advantage of saying what has been achieved from a business perspective. That's the reason as to why handle returns is a better option. And the second reason for not liking the word login is because it's way too small. If you really think about it, login is probably just the first step, or in fact even a precondition in the handle returns use case. Somebody has to log into the system to achieve something, and hence that's exactly what I did. I logged into the system probably 5 times, and for each of the customer I handled their returns. So saying the answer or replying to the question that you asked with respect to 5 logins or 5 handle returns, that's the difference. Even though the work I did was exactly the same between them, just identifying the use cases in different ways actually conveys 2 different meanings, and hence that's where the boss test comes. So just to summarize, the real purpose of boss test, any name of a given use case should convey the business functionality that's actually being achieved. That's number 1. Number 2, it should not be so small that it cannot be considered as a use case by itself. That's basically the purpose of the boss test.